The committee will come to order. Secretary Rubio, thank you. We're probably violating the Geneva Convention doing all this in one day, but I know you've had a long day and I appreciate you coming to the committee. To the new members of the committee, welcome. I look forward to working with you and Senator Britton Mullen. I look forward to working with our new ranking member, Senator Schatz. Senator Coons and I work extremely well, and I'll try to keep that going from my end, and I know you will too. We'll have opening statements. I'll start out, then we'll have 6-minute rounds, and I will start, then Senator Schatz, and we'll have Secretary Rubio. Then we'll recognize people as they come. The deadline for submitting SFOP requests is May 22nd to all the members of the committee. To our audience, you're welcome to be here. If you disrupt, you'll get kicked out. Okay, so let's start the committee meeting with a couple ideas. Reform at the State Department is welcomed. Secretary Rubio has reorganized the place in a way that I think is long overdue. And Marco, I want to congratulate you for sitting down and getting input from people before you. How can we make the State Department work better? And I think your organizational efforts are going to pay dividends, and I support them completely. And people before you have been talking about it, but you've actually done it. So congratulations, and I think it will be good for the country. In terms of the budget, this is 48% below the enacted level. And presidential budgets are given some consideration, and this will get some consideration. Bottom line is, I believe that there is space to save money in this account, and I look forward to finding a way to do that. I think Secretary Rubio is the right guy at the right time. We've had all kind of problems with USAID. We're trying to preserve functions that make sense and eliminate functions that are not in the best interest of the American taxpayer. My view about this account is pretty well known. I would consider myself a fairly hawkish person, for lack of a better term, simply because I think the best way to stay safe is deal with problems before they get worse and put bad guys on notice. If you screw with America, you do so at your own peril, and have allies who trust us. I think we're paying a heavy price from the way we got out of Afghanistan. But this secretary, I spent the weekend with him in Turkey as he met with the foreign minister of Syria, as he met with the foreign ministers of all NATO nations. And I was very impressed with Secretary Rubio of trying to make sure that America first was burden sharing. You need to do more. You need to up your game, but we committed to a world order here, and we're committed to making sure that the world is a good place to live in. Having said that, Syria, we have a chance here. Secretary Rubio allowed me to be in the meetings, and I met the foreign minister of Syria. This is a very tenuous government, for lack of a better word. The people in charge of Syria took over by force of arms, but I've been, quite frankly, impressed with their willingness to engage with us, Saudi Arabia, and their commitment to rejecting Iran and moving the country in a new direction. Secretary Rubio this morning said that it could be a matter of weeks or months to this whole place collapse in Syria, and I agree with him. Syria is designated a state sponsor of terrorism under U.S. law since 1979. I'm looking forward to Secretary Rubio's input about should we change that designation? Is it worth trying? My belief is that we have a moment here to provide some capability to this new government that should be conditions-based, and I don't want that moment to pass, and we have a situation in Syria that's just going to break the country up and continue regional conflicts. Iran negotiations, Secretary Rubio has said something I completely endorse. No enrichment, 1, 2, 3 agreements would be available to the Iranians if they decided to dismantle the enrichment program. as Secretary Rubio indicated, I do not mind the Iranian regime having nuclear power. I mind them having the capability to make a bomb. So right now they have about 600 pounds of highly enriched uranium at 60%. In about a month they could go to 90%. They have one reactor, nuclear reactor, and the fuel for that reactor is provided by the Russians, and I'm okay with that. Of this 600 pounds of highly enriched uranium, not 1 gram has been used to run their peaceful nuclear power plant. Clearly, they're stockpiling uranium to be a threshold nuclear nation, and that is unacceptable to me and hopefully to all of us. So civilian nuclear power, yes. Enrichment, no. I think it's good policy for the country to follow. Russia, Ukraine, Secretary Rubio explained the role the Senate and the House plays in our system to the foreign ministers of NATO, but quite frankly, he's been very clear to the Russians that the Senate is a separate body with its own will, and I hope President Trump is right that Putin wants peace. Time will tell. He certainly doesn't act like a guy wanting peace. We have now 80 co-sponsors of sanctions against Russia for their invasion of Ukraine. I would like to get this war over honorably and justly. And one of the problems we have with this war is China. In case you're listening in China, which I doubt you are, you're propping up Putin. If you would stop buying their cheap Russian oil, he'd have a reason to get to the peace table. India and China are propping up Putin's war machine, and the sanctions we have are secondary in nature. They put a 500% tariff on any country that buys Russian oil, gas, uranium to prop up the Putin war machine. This body will move sooner rather than later if Putin doesn't get to the table. And to China, you want to be a normal country, act normally. Quit buying cheap oil with blood mixed in it to keep a war going that you could end tomorrow if you chose to. Your plate is about as full as anybody I've ever seen. You're juggling so many things at once, and I just admire you and the way you've conducted yourself, and I think you're the right person at the right time. So welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Graham. Secretary, good to see you again. It's been an hour or so. For all of the disruption of the past few months, we are still in a position to write a bipartisan bill in SFOPs, but things need to change if we're going to be successful. If the goal, and I want everyone to hear this, including my Democratic colleagues, if the goal is to reform American foreign assistance so that we can do fewer things and better, then you were pushing on an open door to begin with. If the goal is to reduce overhead, make more strategic investments, and eliminate the tiny fraction of programs that you feel aren't essential to those objectives, you will have bipartisan support for that conversation. Making reforms to be smarter and more strategic with our investments while also preserving the things that were already working, PEPFAR, FMF, life-saving aid, disaster response, is still possible. And Mr. Secretary, I think you know I'm sincere in wanting to work with you to enact a bill that does just that. But we also have to have an honest conversation about what has been happening. And I want to address a few claims this morning. You said that PEPFAR is 85% functional. You've actually cut it to 70%, and by law, you are required to spend the remainder. You have said repeatedly that only 12% of assistance reaches local populations, quoting Samantha Power from a previous report. That is actually not true. The USAID report from last year found that 12% of aid is implemented by local organizations, but that's completely separate from the question of how much aid is actually reaching people. That's Catholic Charities, that's the World Food Program, that's CARE, that is not overhead. Those are other organizations, not local organizations, but flagship American organizations that deliver aid abroad. You have said there is waste and fraud and abuse. I encourage you to make any referrals necessary to the inspectors general. You've said sharing information and taking comments from Congress is essential, but there was only one briefing. I'm hoping all of that can change. As I said earlier, The changes that you're making are not occurring in a vacuum. They are having catastrophic outcomes in the real world. Kids are dying. Mothers are passing HIV onto newborns. We are abandoning our Indo-Pacific partners and paving the way for China to swoop in. And allies are having to beg for the FMF, which they've come to rely on. Even the few programs that have been retained are having a hard time implementing effectively. Fighting HIV/AIDS, helping partners defend themselves, respond to disasters, that is not woke or leftist or radical. It is a foundation of American foreign policy, and they are all under threat. And anytime we've asked for clarity about what the administration is doing, we've gotten very little. The programs that you've repeatedly pointed to as wasteful make up less than 0.5% of the total SFOP's budget. So we're talking about less than 0.5% of less than 0.5% of American discretionary spending. And if the deal was to immediately take all of those offending programs, eliminate them, and enact them, you would be pushing on an open door. But most of all, I want you to understand how important I think it is for the United States of America, for President Trump, for you as a secretary, for us to get to some rhythm of bipartisanship where the Article I branch works with you to enact an SFOPS bill. We are ready to do so, but we need some level of correspondence, interaction, transparency, and cooperation. Thank you.
Secretary Rubio.
Well, thank you. And I'm not going to give the written remarks. I'm just going to sort of walk you through this a little bit. That's the way these things are supposed to work, I hope. And let me first start out by saying, what is the goal here? Because I think it's important, even though we're going to talk about spending and all of that, you're going to do your own appropriations process. We recognize that. But I wanted to explain to you the organization. You have a chart behind you, the new organizational chart. And this is really the launch pad because that's what we're funding. That's what the appropriations bill will be funding. If you had the old one, you would struggle to see what the big difference. I mean, they're different, but there's still a lot of boxes up there. And I want you to understand the primary thing we did, that I wanted to do, and that I alluded to during my confirmation hearing. I want the entire toolbox of American foreign policy to reside within the Department of State, in particular within our regional bureaus that cover the different regions of the world and ultimately down to our embassy. Senator Graham mentioned a moment ago about Syria. It was going to be one of the first test cases of whether this works or not. And what I mean by that is we have an embassy. It's obviously in exile. It's outside. It's in Turkey. We're going to rely on them to tell us, okay, we're on the ground. We've gone in. We've met with the transitional authorities. Here are the things they need. These are the 3, 4, 5 things they need right now. And we need to be nimble enough to provide that. But it needs to be driven from the bottom up, not the top down. I want you all to understand what I inherited when I go into the State Department. I get a memo asking for a decision. Sometimes these memos have 30 to 35 boxes in them that have to be checked off. Each box has to be checked off by somebody on a desk before it even gets to me. That just doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work in the 21st century when events happen very quickly. And so we need to be nimble enough to make a decision, but we also have to make sure that these decisions are being made as close to the front lines as possible. What is the front lines of diplomacy? It is our embassies. It is the men and women who are deployed abroad on the ground who are hearing every single day. And so that's our number one goal. The number two goal is to have, as I said, all the tools of foreign policy in the same toolbox. Foreign aid is a tool of our foreign policy. It is not the only tool of our foreign policy. It has to be taken in conjunction with all of these other things that we do, and they have to be intertwined. Now, perhaps your experience was different, but I went to multiple countries around the world where I would go to the embassy, and the embassy was upset at USAID because the embassy was pursuing one route, maybe closer to a leader who was less than ideal, but we had a geopolitical interest, why we wanted to get closer to these people. And then USAID was funding a program that made the government angry. And so it cut off our ability. Now, maybe we still do that, but there has to be a balance here. There can't be if they're two separate entities arguing with each other, in some cases not even communicating. In other cases, this was my recent trip to the Caribbean, where they told me, America's always been very generous at giving us things you think we need, as opposed to the aid we think we need. And the aid they think they need in some of these countries is they need to build up police departments. They need to build up law enforcement so they can interdict drugs and secure the streets. And if they get that right, then they can send kids to school. Then they can attract foreign investment to their country, but they have to get that part right. The third dynamic that I say, and I leave humanitarian aside because obviously natural disasters happen and these things will recur, but the best foreign aid is foreign aid that ends. You know why it ends? The best foreign aid is foreign aid that ends because it's achieved its purpose. So take country X and they say, we want help with our law enforcement. The best foreign aid is foreign aid where at some point that country doesn't need it anymore because now they're self-sufficient. South Korea is a great example. South Korea was once poorer than North Korea. South Korea was once an aid-dependent nation. Today it is an aid donor and the 9th or 10th largest economy in the world. That has to be the goal of our foreign aid. It has to be that it ultimately ends because it creates self-sufficiency. There are other tools of foreign aid, by the way, whether it's the investment funds we have or Millennium Challenge Grant. Those are outside my direct control or purview. They're under the committee's purview, and there will be efforts at reform there as well, and potential even expansion in one of them, although that won't be my decision solely. So as we move forward in some of this, and as you'll see some of the features of the budget we've presented before you, one of the ideas we have is having a global health programs account. The other is having a consolidated humanitarian assistance account. And the combination of these two things will allow us to deliver aid as part of the package driven from the ground up. I said this at the previous hearing. One of the most important things I feel, one of the most useful things to me in my time at the department has been the cables. The cables that I get from ambassadors. We have gotten so many ideas from those cables. Will those ideas have ultimately made their way to me? Maybe. I don't know. But maybe months from now or weeks from now. I want more of that in the department, and I want to empower embassies to be able to make decisions about which programs we should be funding, where the money should be going. I want when an ambassador goes into a meeting for she or he to be able to say to them, here is a portfolio of things we can offer, which ones would make the most sense to you. So we're trying to accommodate that through the creation of these two funds. It's important to understand we're not walking away from foreign aid. We will still be the world's largest foreign aid donor by a lot. It won't even be close, but we want to target it more effectively. Another feature is this America First Opportunity Fund, which frankly will allow us to be more nimble in providing funds for specific programs that arise outside the normal cycle of funding. And Syria, once again, is a great example. We don't have any money in the fiscal year's budget for Syria because, frankly, none of us thought we would be talking about helping the Syrian government 6 months ago or 8 months ago. But now we have an opportunity to do it. And rather than have to go through reprogramming and all kinds of shuffling, to have the flexibility at some level to be able to respond quickly to something like that, that might be multifaceted in the approach, is an important thing to consider as well as aligning it to other priorities that we have as an administration. So I do look forward to working with you because, frankly, I have to. You passed the appropriations bills, but also because I think it can be very constructive.
Thank you, Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say, first of all, welcome, Secretary Rubio. I hope that you look forward to working with us, not only because you have to, but also because you want to. And I keep wondering how it is for you to be on the other side of the dais. But we're very happy to have you in the position that you are. I do want to follow up and talk with you about the global health programs. I obviously share the goal of evaluating programs, reforming them to root out wasteful spending, reduce overhead costs, even question whether or not a particular program has achieved its objective and is no longer needed. However, I'm also mindful that U.S. international assistance plays a key role in helping us to respond to humanitarian crises, fight the spread of deadly diseases like Ebola, and project soft power. And that's why I'm concerned that the president's budget request proposes a cut of 62% below the enacted level of 2025 for global health programs. Are you concerned that if we cut back by that amount, that China is going to step in and pick up the terminated USAID health programs, particularly in Southeast Asia?
Well, let me first say China has no history in the past or even now. I know that there's been some talk about this, but they really have demonstrated no willingness or capability to deliver humanitarian aid at scale to anyone. Their aid is largely driven by loans, sometimes low interest or no interest loans, but nonetheless loans, and in other times interest, traditional loans to trap nations. They also give you the money so that you hire their companies to do the work. But on the space of humanitarian, they are not a major player. As I said, even on humanitarian assistance, the United States dwarfs the next 9 or 10 countries on the list in terms of what we provide. And we intend for that to continue, and that as part of this budget. We'll obviously work with you to find what the number needs to be to fit the need. But I can tell you that one of the reasons why the number is so stark is because the reductions that happened at USAID transferred some of these programs over under state. And so now we have to accommodate that within our overall budget. And so we'll have to work with the committee to find out what the right number is to fit the need. But I will say that it cannot be, no matter what, I think we are living in a time where it's essential that we recognize that this is not a time of largesse. We are going to have to, in my view, to limit how much we spend in general as a government, given the fact that just a few days ago we saw a downgrade to our debt. These are problematic things, and other nations need to step up and do more. It is frustrating to me to see how much money we invest in certain countries, albeit on what we term humanitarian or global health. But when you look at the other side of the ledger, all the business deals, all the critical mineral deals, all their votes at the United Nations are all aligned with China or Russia or Iran. And so I do think that has to be taken into account here. We are humanitarians. We cannot solve all of the world's humanitarian problems. There are many. We can contribute it, and we'll continue to be the largest contributor in the world. But I do think how we allocate the limited resources of our government has to somehow be viewed through the lens of the benefit to the United States, certainly in the mid to long term.
The administration also included Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, in its list of terminated programs. And you've always been a very strong advocate for that program, which has resulted in 1.1 billion children being immunized and averted more than 18 million deaths. And I would point out that the United States is not the largest donor. We actually rank third behind the United Kingdom and the Gates Foundation. But without the U.S. doing what it's traditionally done in this program, Gavi will be unable to vaccinate 75 million of the 500 million children it traditionally has reached every year. And I'm really concerned that that's going to lead to preventable deaths like tuberculosis and pneumonia. So I think about how the Defense Department, always due to our law, has each of these services give us a list of unfunded priorities. Would that be on your personal list of an unfunded priority?
Well, first of all, we still are doing vaccines. We are still doing vaccines for malaria, for example. We're still doing tuberculosis. We're still doing AIDS funding as well. What we have done is we are reviewing our relationship with a number of multinational, multilateral institutions across the board because many of them have strayed from their core purpose, the World Health Organization being one of them, which I personally view did a very poor job in the early days of COVID, as an example. So we're also working closely with HHS to identify alternatives to some of these existing multilateral organizations that we think could end up helping us provide the aid we provide, reach more people for less money, in essence, in a more efficient way. So we'll clearly include that in our work that we're doing. I'm not prepared to tell you whether we've identified today what those alternative entities would look like, but we definitely want to find one. This is the kind of aid we want to continue to provide, but not through the existing mechanisms that we have found wanting in many cases.
Thank you.
Senator Schatz.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Senator Collins' line of questioning, I guess the analogy is, say a hospital that's running inefficiently, and a turnaround guy comes in and says, I got a plan for reorganizing this hospital. We're going to do delivery system reform. We're going to use technology. We're going to be aggressive. We're going to be fearless. And in the meantime, we're going to lay off half of our staff because this thing doesn't work efficiently. The practical impact of that is death. And that's what we're talking about. And so every time we talk about the practical, near-term, immediate, real-world, geopolitical, and humanitarian impacts of what has happened, especially to U.S. aid, you pivot very skillfully and maybe even correctly to what needs to be reformed in the State Department itself and in the interaction and relationship between aid and state. That's not what I'm asking you about. I'm asking you about why in the world we wouldn't do this in the regular order. In order to put U.S. aid under the State Department and better align it, we need a statute. In order to reform all of these programs, we need an SFOPS bill. You can't just come in and light the place on fire and say, well, it was a mess. And so I just want to understand what's the path forward, because people really are dying. It's not as though Catholic Relief Services or CARE or the World Food Program or a bunch of leftists coming out and complaining about everything that's happening because they want to get you. This is actually happening. People are vacating where they work, and then in some instances, the Chinese government comes in and provides the exact same service, not a similar service, but the same program. They just do it. We'll do it. And then in some instances, nobody does it, and as a result, people die. And so I'm just wondering, where do you think the path forward is for us to work Article 1, Article 2, former colleagues, to get this thing back on track?
Well, I think the first path is, let me just say on the regular order part, sure, we want to do that. It would be great to make all these things statutory and codify them. That would be ideal. I will say I was a member of this body for, 6, 12, 30, 40, 16 years, and we always talked about doing it by regular order. We never got to it. So now's the time to do it because we really have to do it now. The second point I would make is the U.S. is going to continue to be a very generous donor for humanity. I would venture to guess that for the rest of our lifetime, no nation on earth, if we can still afford it, no nation on earth will continue to do more for humanitarian assistance, for food and medicine and life-saving services, and even for developmental assistance. But I also think we have to recognize this. We cannot continue to be the foreign aid provider for everyone on everything. We just can't do it. We can't do it efficiently. And we cannot afford to do it either. And if we're going to, we do not have unlimited resources. And so we've now entered an era, particularly of geopolitics, where we have to be very careful about where we invest our money, where we provide aid. Humanitarian systems aside, okay, you have a mudslide somewhere, an earthquake, a hurricane, and we're going to help people. I don't know how much we would want necessarily geopolitics to play into those sorts of decisions.
What's the proposed budget cut in the humanitarian accounts?
Well, it's not the humanitarian account right now. Basically, is the rest of it is reflected at over 50% in the proposed amount that you have right now before you. But we believe that we can provide these essential services while reducing some of the redundancies that were happening through this, for lack of a better term, this foreign aid industrial complex. Some of these projects, I think you understand this perhaps better than most. Some of these projects had a prime contractor who had a sub, who had a sub, who had a sub, who had a sub, who had a local provider. That's crazy. That's lunacy. Why do I need 6 subs to pass one to the other to ultimately get it down to the ground? I think we can get it maybe from the prime to the sub. In some cases, directly to the group on the ground through our embassy. Our embassy can say, we want to provide food in this community. Here's the best people to do it. And I can avoid all those layers of NGOs.
Part of the problem, right, is our tolerance for risk. Because if we establish a bunch of criteria and requirements and pre-audit, then you increase administrative costs, right? And I'm one of these people who thinks that it's not unreasonable to start to capitate or slowly ramp down administrative costs. But administrative costs are not 88%, right? That 12% versus the rest of it cut is what money goes to local NGOs in Africa or Asia or Pacific Islands or wherever, and we should be increasing that number, and we have been increasing that number. But it is the precipitousness with which this is all being done that is actually causing reputational damage. A lot of us are doing CODELs, and when we sort of go overseas and we're we sort of, you know, temporarily take off our partisan hats, we interact with the same providers, and we see kids on half rations getting smaller and smaller. We see kids getting HIV/AIDS from their parents, and nothing you said, in order to implement anything that you're talking about, is it necessary for us to allow children to die? And yet that is what's happening. And so can we please separate these two questions of should we reform the State Department, should we reform the foreign aid enterprise, and should we do it in such a catastrophically unlawful way that people around the world die and people come to believe that they can't believe that America is a reliable partner anymore. And so if we can please separate these questions and get to writing a bill, I think the country will be better for it.
Thank you. To the committee members, I very much believe in soft power, for lack of a better term. Why do we have PEDFAR? Not only is the right thing to do, I think it's just smart foreign policy. If you can save a child, the parents will probably have a good view to you. So Gavi, you know, keeping people vaccinated, that makes perfect sense. And to the people who believe that over there doesn't matter to us, how do diseases start? Usually over there. I'd like to get ahead of it over there before it gets here. I'd like to have less hungry children so the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and ISIS can't recruit these people because they're starving. What would you do if your family was starving? Almost anything. $500 goes a long way for a starving family. So this to me is national security in another form. And to the people who don't get that, you're missing a lot. You're missing how terrorists recruit. They love chaos. They love situations where people are starving and can't send their kids to school and they can't feed themselves because they'll fill in that vacuum. But I will say this about Secretary Rubio. He gets it better than anybody, and I will work with you to change the system to make it more logical, more effective. But I am here to tell you, if we eliminate some of these programs that create stability over there, the chaos will surely come here. And if you don't get that, you've missed a lot of history. Having said that, Marco, what you're doing at the State Department is long overdue, and we'll find some common ground through the SFOP's process to accommodate the reforms you want, but also to make sure that our values are intact and that we're smart with our dollars to make sure that we're not creating conflict where we could avoid conflict. If you're tired of war, count me in. I think I know how most of these wars start. They start with terrorists being able to recruit people, and if we can take that off the table, we're safer. I'm going to go through a list of issues real quick. Do you think it's in our interest to relieve sanctions in Syria?
Yes, incrementally.
Okay. Do you have as your objective to change the state sponsor of terrorism designation over time?
In Syria? Yes.
Yeah.
If they meet the standard.
Is it your position when it comes to Iran that civilian nuclear power through 1, 2, 3 agreements is in our national interest?
I think that if it prevents them from having a nuclear weapon, that would be in our national interest.
Right. So dismantlement plus a 1, 2, 3 agreement. Get out of the enrichment business, and if you do that, you can have a 1, 2, 3 agreement. Is that a fair summary of where you're at?
Yeah, or something equivalent to it that allows them, if they want, to have a civilian nuclear program, but not the ability to enrich.
Count me in. I think that's very smart. You keep saying, and I was with you all weekend, you were great talking about, you know, you want to end this war honorably and justly. And do you agree that the way we end the war in Ukraine with Russia could affect how China views what they do in Taiwan?
I think the way we end the war could impact how China views it. I think the continuity of this war will also impact it because it's draining resources from us and from our allies that could be spent on building up our capacities in the Indo-Pacific. So both can be true.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. When it comes to Russia getting to the table, do you think Putin's ready to make peace?
I think Putin will always cut the deal he thinks is in its best interest for the country, for Russia and for his view of the world. I think right now, frankly, he has said, here's the latest. He says they're going to submit a proposal that would lead to a ceasefire that would then lead to a broader negotiation. I think we will know from the context of that proposal where their mindset is and where they stand.
You keep telling people, rightly so, that the Senate, you can't stop. I mean, you know, we want to work with you. These sanctions were designed to help, not hurt. I'm trying to help the president, give him leverage. To my Democratic colleagues, thank you for being on board. We're trying to get the right answer here. This is not a competition between us and the administration. It's trying to a coordinated effort to end the war that President Trump is right to want to end. I guess here's my question. We'll know in a couple of weeks whether or not they're serious. Do you believe that if there were tariffs on China for buying cheap Russian oil, that would make a difference toward Chinese policy regarding Russia?
At 500% tariffs?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that has an impact on nations.
I agree. Do you agree that if China stopped buying oil from the shadow fleet, it would put a real dent in Putin's war machine?
I think it's widely understood, including by our European partners, and I remind them of this all the time when we're together with them, that there is no way that Russia could sustain its war effort without assistance from China. China has helped Russia as much as they can without getting caught.
Do you think Europe is serious about doing their part when it comes to sanctions on Russia and trying to find a solution to end this war?
Yeah, we actually saw we met with them this weekend in Rome, and they are on path and they are on route now to maybe as early as the middle part of this week, applying additional sanctions on Russia.
Thank you very much. I think Senator I think it's Merkley is what I've got. No, Coons.
Thank you
I'm
very
sorry.
much.
There you are, Senator Coons. Senator Merkley. Peace is breaking out on the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Schutz, and good to be with you again, Secretary Rubio. I wanted to make sure that the point's been made, as I suspect it has been by my colleague, that reform to USAID and reform to some of the authorities and the spending in the legislation that we passed in the last Congress is something that could easily have been done with partnership with this committee and with Congress, and should have been done that way. I wanted to touch on a few things that you and I worked on that I think deserve continued support and that I think are important for us to sustain. Senator Graham and I worked to pass the Global Fragility Act in 2019. You were a co-sponsor. It was signed into law by President Trump. And it's designed to save literally billions of dollars by addressing root causes of terrorism in fragile countries. As you put it at the time, as the U.S. responds to humanitarian crises, we must address the factors driving instability and violence. It's both moral and international security to promote stable and prosperous countries, and I'm proud to introduce this legislation. I'm planning to work with Senator Graham on reauthorizing it this year. The primary implementing entity had long been the Bureau of Conflict Operations and Stabilization. That's a bureau that's been restructured. Do you still agree it's in our national interest to have a targeted strategy to address the root causes of terrorism? And will you work with us to sustain the capabilities we need in the State Department to continue the Global Fragility Act's work?
Yes, and let me add to that because it's a good example. Number one, part of the reorg, just because we got rid of an office, named something, doesn't mean the function goes away. It means that we want to drive that through the regional bureau. So a great example of global fragility, I keep going back to this over and over again, is Syria.
Yep.
And if that fragility is not addressed, there's going to be terror. There already is. I mean, ISIS is already growing there and potentially growing even more dangerous. If there's a civil war in Syria, you're going to have an ungoverned space where multiple groups are going to break out and not just threaten the region, but ultimately potentially the homeland. So it's a great example of how global fragility can be applied to the real world, but we have to do it very quickly. We have to be able to act quickly in this regard, which is one of the things we hope to do by being able to drive this down to the regional and local levels.
I also work closely with Chairman Graham, with Chairman McCall, with Ranking Member Meeks, and over 100 co-sponsors of both parties to enact the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation. It was enacted through the NDAA. There's funding allocated to it. You stated in your confirmation on January 15th that this was the sort of public-private partnership that struck you as deserving of support, and I would hope you would move quickly to execute creating it. It simply requires your signature, and obligating the funds and appointing the board. Chairman Graham and I are also working on a similar bill that would address food insecurity, again through a public-private partnership, a foundation that would rely on as much private sector funding and philanthropy as government funding. Do you still support these foundations, and is this something you look forward to working with?
And we'll get you an answer. I mean, we'll get you a decision on that very quickly, which is what you're looking for, is us to go through and try to implement the law.
Yes.
I recall the plan correctly. We'll get to that fairly quickly. We've had a lot going on over the last 4 months, but we'll get to it, including 100 and something reports that we inherited that were overdue. We're working through those as well. But because you raised it here today, if you give me a few days, I'll get you an action on it.
Thank you. We have spoken about the MCC. The Millennium Challenge Corporation is a Bush-era initiative that used metrics and accountability, working against corruption and in long-term partnership with countries to give them an alternative to Chinese financing. As you've described it, and I agree, debt trap financing. There's current compacts active in countries like Indonesia, the Solomon Islands, Nepal, Kiribati, where it gives transparency and cost sharing. You are the chair of the board of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. I understand from our discussion this morning that you're aware it's in some transition. Can you just confirm it's going through reform and will not be shut down wholesale?
Yeah, I can confirm. We're on the board. We don't operate it, obviously. We're on the board, but it's not a State Department function. We are one of the board members. I'll be at the chair, and actually our deputy, Chris Landau, is serving in that role when I'm not available to be at these meetings and so forth. My understanding as of the latest updates that I've gotten with the work that's being done is it is undergoing a reform effort, or streamline effort, but not a takedown effort.
I think it would be an unforced error for us to hand away the relationships and the competition with China that are metrics-based and transparent that the MCC has put in place, so I hope to work with you on that. Last, your testimony highlights an America First Opportunity Fund as a flexible and responsive account that will address waste in foreign assistance and be more agile. But at least as I see it in your proposal, the account replaces $9 billion of programs with a $3 billion account to cover everything from countering the PRC, countering Russia, aiding Jordan and others. Could you just briefly describe how you imagine that math working and how this fund being sufficient to meet a wide menu of needs?
Well, part of it is we found that some of these programs underneath it were scattered, some of them were duplicative, there were some inefficiencies. So we truly believe, now what the right number is, obviously, that's what we'll have to work with you on, but we truly believe that we can deliver on the same goals for substantially less than what those combined pre-existing funds or projects would have cost. But what it's going to enable us to do is to ensure that assistance funds are directed towards the highest priority projects that we may have on any given basis, on any given moment, given global events that are happening. It provides enough, in addition to these existing programs, it provides us being nimble enough to deal with a contingency in a world that rapidly evolves, as opposed to having to go back and repurpose existing funds to do it. So that's really the goal of the fund, is to be able to move at the speed of relevance when it comes to global events and not have to wait for the next funding cycle to come across or work through some reprogramming process that could take time for us to be able to respond quickly.
I do think, as a former senator, I hope you'll agree that there has to be a modicum of consultation, review, and approval by this subcommittee and others. But the target of agility, responding to world events, I suspect you'll get bipartisan support for that. But there needs to be a congressional role in oversight and accountability. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Mr. Chairman, I'd yield to the Majority Leader, former Majority Leader, Senator McConnell.
Senator McConnell, you're up.
Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Obviously, there are two ways to prevent war, and and to maintain America's position in the world. Hard power, soft power. Over my years here, the people that have spoken mostly about the importance of soft power have been generals who know the cost of war. So we're talking about saving money, and I'm all for that. Let's take a look at what it costs to have an actual war. 37% of our GDP in World War II spent on defense, 13% in Korea, 9% in Vietnam. The Reagan buildup, about 6% of GDP. It worked. They didn't want to mess with us because they knew how strong we were going to be. And an equal partner, much less costly, is the soft power side. I think, I don't care what you call it or how you reorganize, but the basic functions that soft power provides are extremely important. You get a lot of friends for not much money. And we're being outmaneuvered, as you well know, in country after country after country by the People's Republic of China, who are effectively playing in ways that are more effective than we are. So if you can figure out how to way to reorganize it and call it whatever you will, that role is extremely important. How are foreigners looking at us right now? I think they think we're losing interest. The previous administration didn't have a single budget for defense that even kept up with inflation. And unfortunately, because of the continuing resolution this year, it looks like more of the same. So it strikes me, no matter how well the tariffs, for example, work out, that the perception at the beginning of this administration is that we want to fight with our allies and figure out some way to make an agreement with our enemies, which brings me to Ukraine. And I think the America that I believe in, and most of us believe in, would find no equivalence between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And so I'm hoping, as this administration moves forward, it doesn't end up not facing the actual enemies we have now, North Korea, China, Russia, Iran's proxies, by working with our allies to stand up to them. Just to take a specific example of how soft power makes a difference, look at a country like Burma that you've had an interest in, and I have too over the years. Horrible place run by despicable people. Lots of storms and problems of one kind or another. The Chinese are in there just operating effectively. And we, because of not honoring contracts and some of the other things that we were doing to try to be helpful, just completely getting outmaneuvered. So, having had to endure that, I'd be interested in your observations about what you think about soft power and how important it is to this country's future.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I think soft power has the Department of State ultimately is a soft power entity. I mean, it's the Department of Peace. The Department of War is a Department of Defense. Our job is to try to prevent them. And so I do think that the model you've outlined, especially during the Cold War, was quite useful because during that time, that model served to keep societies from collapsing and becoming susceptible to Marxist regimes taking them over. That was the biggest fear during the Cold War, was that governments with high levels of poverty would be attracted to a Marxist revolution that would overthrow an allied government and create another satellite state for the Soviet Union. We live in a different world today. The threats look different. In some cases, fragility is still a factor, but it is largely a factor that will lead to either a costly humanitarian crisis, and in some cases, operating in safe haven spaces for radical jihadists to threaten us here at home. So the concept remains true. How it's applied is what has changed, because I think the context, and in that context, no matter how much even with these reductions that are proposed before you, we would still be the single largest foreign aid donor on the planet by multiples. I mean, no one even comes close. I think Germany was second, if I recall the last time I checked, and it's not even close. That remains the case. What we have to do now is apply that soft power to the places where it matters most to our national interests and to the programs that can make the biggest difference, the biggest impact in furthering our national interests. I think it's possible to both be a humanitarian and at the same time further the national interest. And there are cases where perhaps there isn't going to be a national interest argument. We just do it because we don't want people to die, or we want to help alleviate suffering. The case of Burma is an example. It wasn't just a reduction in aid because we had teams on the ground. It was actual local authorities that prevented us from getting involved or allowing certain aid to be distributed because they were in the middle of their own conflicts internally in the midst of it. So some of these environments where we're trying to deliver aid are quite challenging. Even if we provide the money, we struggle to get it to the recipients because of some local impediment on the ground that could include, for example, in the case of Haiti, armed gangs that will hijack humanitarian shipments and steal them. Just steal them as soon as they come into the country. So it's not that we care less about Haiti, but I certainly don't think foreign aid should be going into the hands of a Haitian gang and being stolen from the people that we're intending to benefit.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And second chance to ask some questions of you today. Thank you for testifying in multiple committees. Back in March, you noted that you had revoked some 300 student visas using the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, which specifically says the Secretary of State can revoke a visa if an alien's activity in the U.S. would have a serious adverse foreign policy consequence. And that issue of 300, what's the number up to now? How many visas have you revoked?
I don't know the latest count, but we probably have more to do.
Can you give us an estimate?
Probably in the thousands at this point, depending. Not all of them are under that statute. Some are people. So there's two visa revocations.
I don't want to go into SEVIS. It's a separate issue. And
No. They're related, but we can't conflate them because they're two different. One is the one you've decided, national interest of the United States. Some of the visa revocations are happening because somebody violated the terms of their visa. They dropped out of school or they got convicted of a crime or some criminal investigation.
Okay.
Those are separate from what you've said.
So 300 in March, but now 1,000. How many under this 1952 Act?
I'd have to
Roughly?
get you a good answer, but probably under 1,000. But I'd have to get
Can
you
you
the right
follow
answer.
up and
I don't
get
want
us
to speculate
an
about the
answer?
exact number.
And I'll tell you, this particular thing, it does bother me. And you testified in Louisiana Immigration Court in a pretty expansive interpretation of that 52 law, saying that it could be for citizens, it extends to any non-citizen for past, current, or expected beliefs, statements, or association. And that expected really caught my mind. This power rests solely, this 1950 law rests solely with you. And your interpretation sounds like you're saying if you, the Secretary of State, think you expect someone's beliefs or statements, past, current, or future, then you can toss their visa.
The visa's not a right, it's a privilege.
All right, so I will just say, and then I'm going to go on to another topic. I profoundly disagree. The Fifth Amendment is very powerful in protecting citizens and non-citizens alike with due process. I know this will be adjudicated in court, but the idea that one individual could on their opinion of someone's future activity or expected activity, that one individual, being our Secretary of State, can toss somebody's visa, seems to me an extraordinary violation of due process. I won't ask you to defend it now. I'm happy to put it in writing for you to give us a follow-up and explain it better. But I do think it's a fundamental attack on freedom because due process is the guardian of the gate. to keep a government from taking away people's life or liberty, and liberty is what happens when you take away a visa without due process. I want to turn to the issue my colleagues have mentioned, and that is there is a legal way to restructure the Secretary of State's department and USAID specifically. But what we saw on February 3rd was Elon Musk say, over the weekend, I tossed USAID into the wood chipper. That's a pretty profound weekend. It didn't involve consultation with Congress over the consequences. There was no rewriting of the law. There was no discussion of what funds could be delayed, frozen, redirected. And the result is different groups have estimated how many people have died to date and will die over the course of a year or a prolonged period as a result of the destruction of the weekend of February 1st and 2nd. Did Elon Musk have your support in putting USAID into the wood chipper?
Well, I don't think that's a X post, or I guess you're imagining a social media post, is not a government action.
Not at all. That's a quote. That's what he said.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, that's what he said, but that's not ultimately what happened as acting director. Is all these decisions
Did
have to
his
come to
actions
me.
have your full support
The ones that I signed off on, yes, which is the ones that
of
happened.
what
because
Elon Musk did with USAID?
No, but understand, these are contracts. All these
Did he do it
contracts.
without or with your support? That's what I'm trying to understand.
Well, not
Because
my support, it was my
team,
actions.
his Doge team did a lot of cancellations very, very quickly, and it fired a lot of people. It wasn't clear to me whether that had your
No,
support or not.
the Doge team didn't do anything. I did it. I was the one that made the decisions. I went through contracts, literally spreadsheets, line by line. I remember being in a hotel, I believe in Guatemala, going through line by line on spreadsheets of contracts that were canceled, contracts that were approved, contracts that were amended. These are all contracts.
So in that case, I'll put the responsibility with you since you're taking credit for it rather than with Elon Musk. But the Boston School of Public Health has a kind of a website where they post their estimated deaths as a result of the actions that were taken to dismantle USAID. And they're updating it continuously. So you go to it, the numbers keep changing. They have a one-year estimate, but they also have what they estimate has happened to today. And as of today, they estimate that the actions taken in putting USAID in the wood chipper, child malnutrition, 53,500 more deaths. And I'm rounding off because the numbers are continuously changing. Child diarrhea, 45,400 more deaths. Child pneumonia, 59,200 more deaths. Malaria, 25,100 more deaths. So what happened that weekend has resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of children. And the estimate for the end of this year is much, much higher. This happened because the law was not followed for consultation with Congress, analysis, bringing in experts, holding hearings. How do you kind of accept what you just put forward, that it was your action to cancel these contracts? Your contracts in this fashion, freezing fund, firing individuals, has resulted in the death of hundreds of thousands of children.
That's false. That's fake. That's just not true. That's a study based on if we canceled every one of these programs permanently. Okay, and I'm reading it right here because I'm glad you brought it up. It assumes a near total freeze in U.S. foreign aid for HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and other diseases. There is not a total freeze. 85% of PEPFAR recipients are receiving their care right now. But the numbers you're saying, those aren't real numbers. I understand that's what the school said in the worst case dramatic scenario, and even then I think it's exaggerated. But there's just no evidence of the fact that, I don't remember what the numbers are, 100,000 children have starved to death in the last 4 months because the United States made reductions to USAID. Well, that first of all is pretty atrocious. That would mean that nobody else in the world is doing anything. We're taking care of the entire planet?
Well, I must say, I think your response does not fit with what the published results were, but there's other groups that have done this as well. There's a study in Nature with healthcare experts from a whole number of leading universities, and they said basically if you shut down USAID, and it may not be fully shut down, but my colleagues who follow this closely say, it's 80, 90% shut down. And Nature study, or published in Nature, said, look, because of what has happened, we will see some 15 million additional deaths over 15 years just from HIV, producing 14 million orphans, and another 10 million people children and adults dying from malnutrition, tuberculosis, diarrhea, malaria, and other diseases. And there's even higher numbers from the Friends of the Global Fight Against AIDS. I think it's this rash shutdown without due process of law, that is not coming and doing it in collaboration with rewriting the law, freezing funds, canceling these contracts without consultation, that you have exacted enormous harm on the world.
Again, those numbers you're saying are staggering and unrealistic. The reality of it is, if what you're saying is that unless the United States funds foreign aid at these levels in perpetuity, the world's going to suffer 15 million deaths in 15 years, and every country should be voting for everything we want at the UN.
The number was 15.
Because we're basically funding and feeding the world.
15 million in the study of nature, yes, from the shutdown of these programs.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you. Secretary Rubio, welcome. Welcome back to Capitol Hill. Let me ask you to tell us, as the State Department prepares to undertake restructuring of its humanitarian aid operations, where does food assistance fit in within the department's strategic priorities, and in which office will state place those programs?
Well, it'll be under our director, the new directorate that will oversee both human rights and humanitarian affairs and foreign aid. The only ones that are going to be separated from that is military sales and military financing, but the primary driver of our humanitarian assistance, food assistance, medicine will be through the new bureau that will handle that. It'll be a Senate-confirmed position as well that will respond and answer to that they will answer to. And it will be a priority, but it will be structured in a way to deliver the most amount of money, or the most amount of aid at the least amount of cost in the most effective way.
Do you have a person in mind as this position is in the process of being filled?
That will require Senate confirmation. I don't believe that position has been filled yet. There's someone acting in a temporary capacity and an acting capacity at the moment, but we will have to come back to you to find a nominee that will run that.
Let me highlight a couple of food programs. Food for Peace and what we call Dole McGovern nutrition program are two long-standing initiatives with deep roots in my home state of Kansas. These programs, in my view, are critical tools in the fight against global hunger, the moral aspect of that, but also vital to Kansas farmers, to American agriculture producers who help deliver. And this program started with a Kansas farmer who felt compelled to do something with excess grain piled on the ground at a time when people across the globe were still starving and hungry. I understand there were findings of mismanagement at USAID. I look forward to working with you in this subcommittee to make sure that mismanagement is something that stays out of our delivery of food aid. I did join with Senator Hoeven and Senator Marshall in legislation that would transfer the administration of Food for Peace to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I have some sense that you are supportive of that concept. I have some sense that the Secretary of Agriculture is supportive of that concept. I have some sense that the Office of Management and Budget is supportive of that concept. This is my first opportunity to have a conversation with you. Tell me how I can be helpful to you and to the department in the cause of Food for Peace and its future.
Well, again, that's still, obviously, there's legislation out there that's pending on it, but I would argue that it is what you have described as the new arrangement under the Department of Agriculture would generally align with the idea that we want to, because no matter what, we still have to work with them on this program. It would align towards removing one more layer of government that allow us to both identify recipients and delivery mechanisms quicker and more effectively. So generally, your perceptions are correct. We're very open to that transition being done. Obviously, whether it's done statutorily or otherwise, it's something would be open to because we think it has the potential to deliver assistance much quicker, much faster, much more efficiently, and perhaps to a broader set of people.
Mr. Secretary, Food for Peace, the Dole McGovern. Let me ask about McGovern Dole. Any observations in regard to that program?
We haven't made any determinations, but I would imagine it would fold under, if it was under our responsibilities, it would fold under the same bureau that's handling what we call the life-saving assistance or humanitarian assistance.
my take from your answer is that there is a role for food aid programs to continue to exist, to be administered. The goal is to figure out how to reduce the bureaucracy and how to deliver more aid for the same bigger bang for the buck.
We're not stopping foreign aid. I mean, we're going to continue foreign aid and at levels as generous, more generous than any other country in the world and most countries in the world combined. The question is, how can we deliver it more effectively and ensure that it is aligned with our foreign policy priorities? But in the case of food aid, as an example, there's no goal to end it or to stop doing this kind of work. It is more about how can we deliver it more efficiently and effectively and quickly. And in ways that are aligned with our broader foreign policy, and to empower, again, I keep going back to this point because it's really important to make, empowering our regional bureaus to drive these programs, to identify chronic or critical needs, whether they're acute or chronic, and allow us to quickly operationalize it, as opposed to having a standoff bureau that views the whole entire world. Holistically, we are able to drive this at the local and regional level where they know what the priorities are and can drive this aid quickly.
Mr. Secretary, among the many things that you've said in this hearing this afternoon, that's one that certainly caught my attention as having merit, get the process where it's the closest to the crisis, the emergency, the facts are better known, and implemented more closely to home in a foreign country. Let me highlight one more feeding program, and this one's about the future. There's a program called Feed the Future, in which research is done in agriculture designed to figure out how to produce more food, in other words, greater efficiency, and a food that's needed in countries that have different kinds of opportunities to feed themselves. How can we use the powerhouse of American agricultural research to find ways to better allow other countries not only receive food aid from us, but also to grow their own?
I think imagine if you're an ambassador in a country that has a chronic food shortage and you're somehow able to provide them American ingenuity that allows them to produce more food at a lower cost using less land or less facility. That's an extraordinary thing to offer as part of our toolbox. But those are unique opportunities that probably exist in some places and not in others. And the ability to identify from the ground level, have an ambassador, an embassy, or a regional bureau identify that as both a need and an opportunity, and then us to operationalize it is exactly the kind of nimble programming that we want to be able to do. But I see great benefit in the ability of us to allow, and it's also, by the way, the kind of foreign aid that ends. Because once they have acquired the capacity to do it, it's helped our companies to find a place where they can deploy it. It's helped them to develop independence. And it creates good faith among the nations in the future. That is part of the soft power that Senator McConnell was talking about a moment ago.
Mr. Secretary, I think it's the components that I've outlined are three circumstances. You meet the needs of someone in a crisis today, but the long-term goal is to help people around the globe be self-sufficient, countries to care for themselves, and reduce the role, perhaps, of the United States in that effort. And I would highlight for what you just said, the program that provides the agricultural research to accomplish what you described as a positive development is a program called Food for Peace. I said that wrong. It's a program called Feed the Future. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair Graham. Senator Schatz, welcome to your new role. I look forward to working with both of you. Secretary Rubio, I am deeply concerned that you have overseen a systemic campaign to dismantle USAID, impound billions of dollars that this committee actually provided, and unilaterally remake the Department of State without the slightest bit of concern that you lack the authority to do that without Congress. It has created chaos, it's caused preventable deaths across the globe, and it has undermined American leadership. As Ranking Member Schatz noted, what you've done is outright illegal, a complete violation of bipartisan appropriation laws, the Impoundment Control Act, and the Anti-Deficiency Act. Within hours of taking office, President Trump halted all foreign aid in flagrant defiance of the law. Now, under your watch, Secretary Rubio, that freeze was implemented with chaos and cruelty. And then you illegally shuttered USAID, placing everyone on leave, halting life-saving work, literally locking people out of the building and out of their devices, even in dangerous corners of our world. You paid people not to work, abandoned our partners across the globe, and chaotically recalled global staff, putting more than 1,600 Americans who served our country abroad in limbo. And when you shut down the USAID payment system, you even refused to pay for services provided before the illegal freeze. You fought all the way to the Supreme Court, against paying for services U.S. businesses already rendered with funding that Congress already provided. And I know you know, Mr. Secretary, but you lost. And I assume you need the reminder because to this day, you have not made all the payments that are required by our nation's highest court, and as a result, American companies continue to lay off American workers. And by the way, you do continue to lose in court, including just yesterday over your move to illegally replace the U.S. Institute of Peace Leadership, and in recent cases over international broadcasting. Now, eventually, Mr. Secretary, you sent Congress notice of your intent to collapse the USAID into state. Only you didn't consult with this committee. That's required by law. It came without justification, also required by law, and it came long after USAID was reduced to rubble. So sadly, disregard for our laws and values, to me, has sort of become a pattern of your tenor, revoking visas when someone writes an op-ed you don't like, or reaching a secret deal to use taxpayer dollars to jail U.S. residents in a notorious foreign prison, no due process, or pointlessly leaving food assistance to rot in storage. Actually, in Dubai, we now have 500 tons of high-energy biscuits that expire in July. They're bought, they're shipped, they're stored, all at taxpayer expense. But you've condemned them to waste, and that is one example of many. Now, another pattern that I'm deeply worried about is transparency. We have pressed you for information. Our staffs have sent you countless emails and briefing requests so we can do our job here. There are hundreds of unanswered requests and no effort to address them. And Mr. Secretary, that's got to change. Even your plan to reorganize the State Department came with no information on the 270 offices you are moving to eliminate, the proposed layoffs, or how USAID would be merged into state. I won't ask you whether impounding billions of dollars is legal. It is not. I won't ask you whether it's efficient to pay people not to work or fire them without determining staffing needs. But, and I won't ask you if cutting 91% of our counter-narcotic and law enforcement programs make us safer, abruptly abandoning agreements with allies makes us stronger, or ceding our global leadership to China makes us more prosperous. Of course not. We know that. We have worked together for years in a bipartisan way to advance U.S. interests and fund those programs. So with respect to my colleagues, how long are we going to sit here and watch this silently? Are we going to roll over as Trump tramples our laws and undermines our U.S. leadership, burns down what we have spent decades building, and let millions of people across our globe suffer and die? Or are we going to stand up, push back, assert our constitutional power of the purse? And to my colleagues on both sides, this is the moment to decide whether this committee continues to be a powerful bipartisan force, a force that I think we've all been proud of for a very long time, a force that is focused on safety and economic strength and national security, focused on leading the world in research and development and countering China and others with our soft power and our military power. Every single member of this committee knows what we are risking by letting this administration tear down so much. On USAID and other programs, we can always talk about how we can make things work better and other reforms. I don't think any of us are opposed to any of those considerations. We have been doing that in a bipartisan way for a long time. But that's not actually what Trump's fiscal year 2026 budget proposes. Now, Mr. Secretary, I know you would like to give a 5-minute speech back to me, but I only have a few seconds left, and I do need some information from you. As I said, we have asked and have not gotten. Can you tell me, will you share the text and details with my staff of your agreement with El Salvador and any other similar arrangements, including the funding details that we need to have?
Well, first, I'd like to respond to your 7-minute speech, which is primarily, I disagree like 99% of it. It's just not true. We've done nothing that's illegal. We've been in over 600
courts
briefings to
have
Congress.
disagreed
We've
with
asked questions. We've answered questions repeatedly. We get hundreds of questions a day. We respond them as quickly as possible. And your characterization of the moves that we
Mr.
made
Secretary, I
were
would
false.
just tell you, we are here because we need the information so that we can write our budget and on a bipartisan.
Well, you'll have the
move
information you
forward.
need to write a budget.
Okay, so will we get the details on the El Salvador arrangement? Yes or no?
Well, which Salvador arrangement are you
Your agreement that you've made with them about.
Well, what agreement? The president of El Salvador agreed to take in
My
250
understanding,
gangbangers, and we
there's
sent
funding
them.
details we have not gotten. We need to see what the costs are.
Well, we haven't funded that. We've provided them law enforcement assistance.
But
I know
that-
you just claimed that we cut all this law enforcement assistance. We've provided El Salvador and other countries law enforcement assistance. They have the right to spend that money any way they wish. But they did us a big favor. They took 250 dangerous, trained out. We didn't deport any
Okay,
U.S. residents. No U.S. residents
I'm
were
not going to
reported.
argue with you on that.
Well,
point.
there's not an argument, but don't say we deported U.S. residents, because we didn't. I don't deport anybody.
I'm not asking.
But we didn't deport U.S.
I'm asking
residents.
you whether we can see the details of the arrangements, including the funding details.
I'm giving you
as
the
an appropriate-
details. The
funding?
arrangements are we provide law enforcement funding to El Salvador, among other countries. How they choose to spend that
Okay,
money internally is up to
I take that as
them.
a no. How
But I
about-
can tell you,
Can you give me the details on the 200-plus offices you're proposing to
Sure, we've
eliminate?
provided
We need that. Can I get your commitment to
sure,
give
of
us
course.
those?
It's part of our reorg.
How about the details and justifications of your proposed rescissions from programs you claim are out of alignment with administration priorities? Are we going to get the details of that, funding priorities?
On rescissions and impoundment and things of this nature, that's obviously an OMB function, and I would talk to them about that in regard to what's going to go on with that money. I can tell you the contracts we canceled, and I can list to you the contracts we canceled and the rationale why, because I went through them
Can you get
myself.
those to us like today? So we can
contracts?
make yes, and the funding arrangements that you've made. That's what I'm asking for.
Funding arrangements with who?
For any of the rescissions, for any of the funding, for any of the multiple congressional directives that you have given out so that we as an appropriations committee can make our funding decisions.
Sure, you're going to have all that information
you.
when you
I
put together a
appreciate
budget.
Thank you. I enjoyed that. So to my friends on the other side, I've been very supportive of this account. But USAID is collapsed, and if you're looking for somebody to blame, look in the mirror. Look at Samantha Powers. I've taken political fire, like most of us have, on our side for trying to be involved in the world. But here's what AID did that's led to what he's doing. $70,000 grant for DEI musical production in Ireland. $69,000 for dance classes in Wuhan, China. $47,000 grant for transgender opera in Colombia. You screwed it up. You took the goodwill of people over here and you pissed it away because you turned over the keys to the kingdom to a bunch of crazy liberals. I can go on. $2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam. $2 million for Moroccan pottery classes and promotion. $2 million for sex changes and LGBT activism in Guatemala. No more from you. None. The reason this thing is dead and never come back is because what you did. The Democratic Party did.
You want me to follow that?
As you wish.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. During your confirmation hearing, you stated preventing crisis is a lot cheaper and a lot better than dealing with the crisis after the fact, which I agree wholeheartedly. In 21, the State Department's budget was roughly $41 billion. Today, of 2025, the budget has almost doubled to $81.67 billion. Is our world safer over the last 4 years than it was when Trump was first in office?
Is it safer today than it was?
No. Before Trump came back, the last 4 years underneath Biden's administration, the State Department almost doubled in their appropriated funds.
Well, I think
over those 4 years, did we become a safer nation? Did the world become safer?
No, I don't think I think the last 4 years have become more destabilizing.
Right.
assign blame where one may want to, but the world is less stable. We have an all-out conflict that at any given moment threatens to spiral into a broader one in the Middle East. We have the Russia-Ukraine war that started in 2022 and has continued to this present day. We've shown China is becoming increasingly aggressive in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea, against both the Philippines, Taiwan, and other claimants in the region. So, yeah, I mean, and by the way, we experienced a mass migration crisis, not just here in the Western Hemisphere, but also because of what's happened in Africa and the Middle East and Europe. So for all those reasons, no, we're not safer.
So it's safe to say that we threw money at it and it didn't help. And so now that we're trying to get it back under control, for some reason the Democrats are throwing an absolute, as I would say, a ringtail fit because we're doing better with the money we sent. There's no room to cut. We've doubled their budget in 4 years. And we have wars upon wars and rumors on rumors of wars. We have Haiti that's absolutely a crap show. We have China that has increased their influence all around our borders. I mean, literally, if you start looking at their influence in Canada, in Mexico, and all over Central and South America, it hasn't worked. We have Africa that is a complete mess. We have a war going on in Ukraine. I'm sure that, that wouldn't have happened if we actually had strong leadership there. We have a war going on in Israel. And what have we done? We've thrown money at what? Going back to the chairman's point of view about USA aid, $73 million spent on DEI. $73 million spent on DEI last year. Because it made us safer? Are we serious? I mean, we have a $37 trillion debt. When are we going to start cutting? At what area are we going to start cutting? And now all of a sudden we're trying to actually make changes and get refocused on mission statement? Sir, I appreciate what you're trying to do. Can you kind of walk me through what your end goal is?
Well, first of all, on the aid portion of it, these are some of the contracts we canceled. I can't go through all of them, and people say what they want, but some of them make no sense to me. I mean,
I say a lot of them makes no sense.
Well, I mean, for example, $32 million to the Prague Civil Society Center. I don't know what that is. I mean, obviously we looked at the contract and we didn't approve it, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me. $14 million for improving public procurement in Serbia. I'm sure that improving public procurement in Serbia is not. Maybe it's a really good thing, but I don't know if that's in our national interest to put that kind of money into that. And that's the kinds of programs that we're talking about. It's not all the outrageous things. There are other things that are involved in this that you look at and say, okay, well, maybe this is a worthy program, but not for us. It's not something that we should be. $1.5 million for voter confidence in Liberia. $14 million for social cohesion in Mali. $2.5 million for inclusive democracies in Southern Africa. $47 million for something called improving learning outcomes in Asia. Again, these things sound really good, I guess, I mean, as noble causes, but can we continue to afford to prioritize these sorts of projects when we have so many other needs, both domestically and abroad? And so our hope is to bring about some sanity to how this money is spent, so when people say we're still spending more money than anybody in the world on foreign aid, but it is being directed in a way that makes sense, that's actually furthering our national interest. And that's what we hope to be able to do. And that's really the end goal here. It's not so much a cutting exercise. There may be savings involved. But the more important thing is that we get better outcomes from it, that we feel like our foreign aid and our giving is aligned with our foreign policy objectives in a specific region, in a specific country.
I think you said it best, national security interest, in words that maybe my colleagues from the other side wouldn't like to hear, but America first. Is it in our interest or is it not in our interest? And we're throwing so much wasteful taxpayer dollars out the door that even the taxpayers want accountability, and which they should. And that is what this administration is bringing, and that's what you're bringing. Now, actually, I don't know if my time's almost up or not, because everybody's been going way over.
It is.
No, everybody else has been going way over.
Yeah.
And so I just want to say, what's the difference between a visa and LPR?
An LPR is someone who's admitted into the country.
Legal permanent residence.
Right.
And
legal
a visa
permanent
is
resident.
what?
A visa is a guest.
A guest, right. They're treated a little bit different underneath.
Well, they're actually treated different from the very beginning because
Right.
we deny visas every day all over the world for all kinds of reasons. But I guess there's this attitude that once you get a visa, now you've been enshrined with some sort of privilege that is unrevocable. And the truth of the matter is, we should be able to. We will continue to. If you were going to do things that if we knew you were going to do it, we wouldn't let you into this country. If you do it once you're here, we're going to take away the visa.
You're a guest, that's right. One thing I want to add is I have a special interest in Haiti. My family and our companies, prior to me getting into Congress and after coming into Congress, have invested a lot into missions throughout Haiti. And it's becoming a failed state. I would really like to work with your office in seeing how we can assist through individuals that we have contacts with ways that we might be able to assist on going forward and putting, hopefully, the right people in place. I've literally spent years dealing with Haiti, and I hate to say it's a failed state, but it will be, and who's going to backfill that is going to be China. And so we'd really like to work with you moving forward on that, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I agree, Senator Mullen. We don't talk enough about Haiti. It's in our backyard, and it's not becoming a failed state. It is a failed state. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Let me personally thank you for your leadership on this subcommittee. We may disagree on some things and some projects, but I believe you've been honest in working with us in the past, and I look forward to that continuing. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you. 99-0. That's a pretty good score coming out of the Senate. I'd like to ask you about Gaza, if I can. They anticipate a famine is underway in Gaza. In the next few days, they anticipate 14,000 infants and children will die. Israel has decided to change its policy to release baby food into Gaza. I just have to ask you, as you must see the same pictures I do, you can't escape them, of these kids with pencil-thin arms, with ribs you can count, spindly legs, wide eyes, who are just on the cusp of death because of the policy of Israel in dealing with Hamas. Now, let me make it clear for the record. I support Israel. I believe what happened October 7th was an act of terrorism, unforgivable act of terrorism. They have a right to defend themselves, period. Number two, I believe Hamas is a terrorist organization. I do not believe that every Palestinian in Gaza territory is a member of Hamas or sympathetic with that band of terrorists, but many of them are. So today, 3 countries, France, United Kingdom, and Canada, made a statement which I'd like to summarize. You probably know this already. They said the resumption of aid into Gaza by Israel wholly inadequate. The United Kingdom paused free trade talks with Israel and sanctioned Israeli settlers. And then this statement, joint message by these 3 countries, allies of the United States. If Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete action in response. Mr. Secretary, are we on the wrong side of history in watching this unfold and not responding as these 3 countries have?
Well, we're not prepared to respond the way these 3 countries have, but we are prepared to say, as we have, and I think the Israelis in their statements today acknowledged, have engaged with our Israeli partners over the weekend and the last few days about the need to resume humanitarian aid. We anticipate that those flows will increase over the next few days and weeks. It's important that that be achieved. I actually had an opportunity when I was in Rome on Sunday or Saturday to see Cindy McCain, as you know, is involved with the World Food Program, discuss their distribution systems. She outlined for me exactly how they would distribute food and how the program would work if it were to be restarted. So suffice it to say that we support 100% the fact that there can be no future in Gaza for the people of Gaza as long as Hamas is around. And by the way, in your comments that you made, I know many of you have noticed, there's been a growing number of anti-Hamas protests and demonstrations as well. So there are people there that understand that this is the root cause of it. That said, you have you have this acute, immediate challenge of food and aid not reaching people, and you have existing distribution systems that could get them there. So we have, and continue to work, even though I've been here in hearings all week, all day, but continued to work with our Israeli partners to, and as I think they've acknowledged in the statement today that they've heard from us, to allow more aid in, because I believe they can achieve their objective of defeating Hamas while still allowing aid to enter in sufficient quantities.
I agree with you. I think what you just said should be our policy. But I don't think we should use these people, these Palestinians, particularly these children, as just a casualty of war. This is a designed attack by Israel into Gaza. This is a designed decision by Israel not to provide humanitarian aid, food, medicine, water. And we provide quite a bit of money to Israel for its own defense and for other purposes. Shouldn't we be more forthcoming to speak about this humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, I think there's two things that Israel has expressed, and I don't want to speak for them because they speak for often on this topic. The first is their complaints that humanitarian aid is often stolen and siphoned off by Hamas elements. Well, it has. There's no doubt that there has happened. That said, the question is whether it has to be. The question is there a way to reliably reach as many people as possible and prevent the humanitarian crisis you're describing, while not enriching Hamas or providing Hamas relief. And we believe there is a way to do it. And we want to be supportive of that way to do it. And we've encouraged them to do it in that way, and we think we've made progress.
Did you ask Cindy McCain whether Hamas was diverting food supplies from the people in Gaza?
We didn't discuss that. We talked mostly about, I wanted to get a description of what the distribution points look like. How can you get assistance to the most number of people as quickly as possible in an orderly way based on where they live and where they are in different parts of Gaza?
Is this an emergency humanitarian situation in your view?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think we all see the same images. The question that I had in my mind in meeting with her and discussing is, do we have the mechanisms in place to quickly start, if in fact an agreement could be reached to allow humanitarian aid to flow? Did we have the mechanics in place to allow the World Food Program and their contractors to go in and immediately begin to provide it? And she assured me that they do, that they could, because one of the arguments or one of the concerns that existed is that the organizations that could do the distribution were not on the ground or were not capable of starting so quickly. She assured us that they were.
If we have this in place, what are we waiting for? These children are dying.
Well, it's my understanding, again, I've been here all day, but it's my understanding that starting yesterday and moving through the next few days, aid will increasingly flow in, and hopefully that will allow these programs to work.
I certainly hope so, too. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thanks, Senator Durbin. Senator Bozeman. Oh, by the way, today is Cindy's birthday. Happy birthday, Cindy, wherever you may be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to have you, Mr. Secretary. We're very proud of you, but we do miss having you around very much. I want to follow up a little bit about some of the path that Senator Moran was going down about food aid. In the process of reworking the programs, could you speak to how the State Department is coordinating with other agencies like USDA regarding setting up a new foreign assistance framework? And can you also speak, I know you've been very, very supportive of the American farmer, as is the President, how that this can enhance American farmers' markets?
Well, first of all, and it's, I think this committee probably understands it, but others perhaps don't fully appreciate, we actually do foreign aid across multiple other agencies as well. So USAID does some, HHS does some, so there are other agencies that do. So that's a process we intend to look at and see if there's some duplication there that we can avoid and perhaps increase our efficiency in regards to delivering services. In the case of food aid in particular, with Secretary Rollins, we've been in touch with her team, and obviously we've done a lot of reform and a lot of change over the last few months. So this is one that is a little further behind, but I think the intent is to find a way that we can leverage what USAID is already doing, USDA is already doing, to enhance how we provide food assistance around the world in a way that benefits the American farmer, but also fulfills our desire to provide assistance around the world where needed and where it furthers our national interest.
Good, very good. Let me talk to you a little bit about the Fulbright program. And the Fulbright alumni, 44 Fulbright alumni have served as heads of state and government. 89 foreign governments contribute over $90 million annually. I know in my travels, and you're traveling so extensively now and have been for many, many years, it seems like every time that you're in a foreign country and you're visiting with the cabinet members, you know, half of them are Fulbright scholars, and they're very, very proud of it. 49 governments match or exceed the U.S. government's annual contribution. I guess the question is, would you be willing to work with us to find a solution that strengthens the program and yet fits into today's challenges, which are different than they have been in the past? But the opportunity for the leadership of these other countries across the ranks to have them such that they're very, very familiar with the United States in that way, I think is really invaluable.
Well, and I think that's most certainly going to be a part of our process. As you know, we're at the beginning of this appropriations process going into the new year. We have a submission we've made to you, a preliminary submission. Obviously, I served here long enough to know that you'll have your own set of ideas about what the priorities should be and what we should be looking to do, and we understand that, and we'll work very closely with you on those priorities, because in the end, we'll tell you what we need in order to run our agency, and then you'll tell us what we need as well. That's the way it worked in the 15 years I was here, 16. I imagine that's the way it'll continue to work. I do think ultimately what we want to do is share the same goal. And we owe you that document as a starting point. And I wanted to interlace it with the org chart. Again, I know some people don't want to talk about reorganization, but I do think they're intertwined and they're deeply important. Not that they don't want to talk about it, but they want to separate one from the other. But look, we're going to be engaged with you in this appropriations process, because I think it's beneficial to us, but also because we have to, because ultimately you will write that. And I think the department will be stronger if you can pass an appropriations bill and get it through the other house and have it signed by the president. We want you to be able to pass an appropriations bill.
Yeah, very much. One of the things in traveling, you know, you're there, you get the in-country team briefing and stuff, and you just wonder, you know, what the State Department's doing to further U.S. economic interest, including advocating for U.S. businesses abroad. Can you tell us kind of what your ideas are in that regard?
Well, it's a mission that we have in this reorganization. The economics team will really focus on it, but it is a mission we have to try to connect American companies to business opportunities abroad. And in many of the countries around the world that you go to, particularly those that are developing, maybe not underdeveloped, but developing countries, they seek American expertise. Where we have seen barriers to entry in some countries are manifest in one of two ways. The first is, frankly, there are a lot of countries that are open to American investment, but they don't have strong rule of law. By that I mean you can sign a contract with them, but if a month later someone else's cousin gets elected judge or mayor, someone will come knocking on your door and saying, this business no longer belongs to you, it belongs to us. So there's that sense. In some cases, it's security. They just feel that there's not enough security in the country for them to make long-term investments. And in other cases, frankly, there are things, we have competitors that bribe foreign officials. We lose business opportunities because someone shows up with a bag of cash, and that's unlawful and illegal for an American business to do. That said, we are constantly looking for opportunities where American expertise can provide resources. One of the areas you're seeing a lot of that now is in the mining of rare earth minerals, where multiple countries are lining up to invite American companies to come in and do that sort of mining in an ecologically responsible way, not in a destructive way to their natural environment. We think that's a huge opportunity as well for the U.S. And again, we want that going back, as it's a broken record, but these are the kinds of opportunities that are driven from the local level up. When you get these cables saying the local government or local economy is looking for greater U.S. investment in this sector, it allows us to partner with companies here that are looking for expansion abroad and hopefully create those opportunities for them.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I ask my questions, I want to go back to your characterization of USAID and the Democrats' responsibility for what happened with that program. I think you've heard from virtually every person who has talked today, and we certainly heard this morning in terms of the Foreign Relations Committee, that if there were improprieties in USAID, then we were on board with addressing those, and we were on board with making changes to make sure that didn't happen again. But the concern is the wholesale throwing out of the foreign assistance programs for the 0.3% of grants that we agree maybe should never have been made. A number of them are things that never happened. They've been made up, just like President Trump's reference to transgender mice in his State of the State address. That's not what happened. He was talking about transgenic mice, which are used in cancer experiments, not transgender mice. So I think we would all be better served if we tried to work together to address the challenges of providing foreign assistance in a way that, as Secretary Rubio has said, and I think most of us have agreed with, makes it more effective and better. And I'm not sure that the chainsaw that Elon Musk took to USAID makes it better on its face. And we can disagree about that, and I'm sure we will, because we may have different views. And I, for one, don't appreciate Senator Mullin suggesting that because I may have a different view on how USAID foreign assistance should be operated, that I'm less of a patriot and don't believe in the security of this country. So, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we could dispense with the name-calling in the future. And I agree, you've been a great defender of foreign assistance programs. I feel like I have too. So we should agree on that.
You have, and I guess the only reason I did this, you've accused this man of killing 15 million people.
I didn't accuse him.
Well.
I think they quoted a report that suggested that because of changes to foreign assistance, that there would be significant numbers of people killed. I don't blame Senator Rubio for that. But I do blame the policy changes for the devastating impact they will have on people across the world. And I hope that we can fix those and that we are all committed to doing that.
I'll give you another minute because I interrupted you.
Okay. Well, let me go back to the question that I asked this morning, Senator Rubio, which has to do with Ukraine. Because we were talking about sanctions, and one of the things you pointed out is that the Trump administration has left in place the sanctions on Russia. Today, the EU and the UK imposed sweeping new sanctions on Russia, including targeting close to 200 vessels in Moscow's shadow fleet. But we haven't seen our sanctions change to address the changes that Moscow has been able to make in response to the sanctions regime that we've put on. So the question is, and I asked you this morning, Senator Graham and Blumenthal have a bill that has 80 Senate sponsors on it that would put in place secondary sanctions on Russia because of its continued failure to come to the negotiating table to really look at how to end the war in Ukraine. Is this legislation that you or the Trump administration or the White House would support?
Well, it's legislation we're most certainly aware of. I am not today in a position to tell you we're going to endorse it or support it at this time, and I'll explain why. We want to continue to play the role where we can speak to both sides of this conflict and get them to the table to end this war once and for all. The president is fully aware, as he has reminded on numerous occasions, both in posts on social media and in public statements, he fully recognizes that he has options at his disposal. I can also tell you, and I believe you're personally aware, along with Senator Graham, that we have warned the Russians for the better part of 2 months that the Senate is working on a package which is far more severe than anything the president could impose under his own authority in many cases, and that eventually if progress isn't made, people were going to give us some time to work this out, but if that didn't work out after a while, there was nothing that it was going to happen. This was going to come. So we're aware of that. Suffice it to say that we are still hopeful, although at the same time realistic, but hopeful with our eyes wide open, that we can reach a point here where we can begin even the process of negotiating this. We've spent a lot of time on this. We've met with both sides, far more with the Ukrainians than with the Russians. We've had 2 technical talks with the Russians in the past, 1 high-level engagement. The president's spoken to President Putin 3 times. We've spoken to the Ukrainians far more. So what we're expecting now, based on the president's phone conversation yesterday and my conversations over the weekend with Mr. Lavrov, is that at some point here fairly soon, maybe in a number of days, maybe this week hopefully, the Russian side is going to present terms that they would want to see, just broad terms, that would allow us to move towards a ceasefire. And that ceasefire would then allow us to enter into detailed negotiations to bring about an end to the conflict. We are hoping that will happen. We believe that the term sheet that the Russians produce will tell us a lot about their true intentions. If it's a term sheet that's realistic and you can work off of it, that's one thing. If it makes demands that we know are unrealistic, I think that will be indicative. And what the president will decide to do at that point, I can't speak for him at this moment. I'm not prepared to say. But I think we all know he is aware of both his authorities to sanction, and he is well aware of the fact that this bill is moving in the Senate. And it's one of the reasons why I asked Senator Graham to join me in Turkey when we engaged the night you arrived with our Ukrainian partners as well.
I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that you have talked more to the Ukrainians. And yet, this morning when we talked about continued assistance to Ukraine, you said that nothing had been done to cut that assistance. But you have cut energy assistance that's necessary for repairing their grid, electric grid after missile attacks and keeping electricity flowing. I've visited some of those electric grids, so I know how critical they are. You've cut assistance to help Ukrainians document, verify, and report on war crimes to allow them to one day hold perpetrators accountable. Again, I've had the opportunity to meet with some of those folks who were in the process of documenting the atrocities that have occurred. You've cut cost-free cooperation with international bodies that are tracking kidnapped Ukrainian children. You've cut assistance to strengthen security sector oversight, which is helpful to us as we make sure that the Ukrainians are spending funds that we have provided them appropriately. So in my mind, that doesn't mean that this administration has continued assistance to Ukraine. It means that you've cut assistance to Ukraine in many areas, the ones I just outlined. And so, again, if we're going to see a dynamic change in these negotiations and to get legitimate peace negotiations going on, then we've got to put more pressure on Russia. And so far, the administration has not been willing to do that.
Well, I don't agree we haven't put pressure on Russia as we continue to insist upon them coming to the table. For example, they agreed, albeit less than ideal, direct talks for the first time in 3 years occurred this weekend in Turkey. For the first time in multiple years, since at least 2022, the Russians have agreed to produce documentation. Now, it may not lead to anything, and at some point we may wind up right at the point you're pointing to. The president's just not prepared to close the door on that yet because he still hopes to achieve peace.
Let me just clarify. My understanding is that President Trump offered to go to Turkey to meet with President Zelensky and with Vladimir Putin. President Zelensky went. Vladimir Putin refused to go and basically dissed the president's willingness to go to meet with them in person.
I think the president...
That was certainly what was reported.
Yeah, but I was on that trip. I think the president expressed, yes, so there's going to be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin. I'm more than willing to go, but there wasn't going to be one. Putin never agreed to a meeting with Zelensky.
Right, so the president was willing to go, but Vladimir Putin wasn't. If that in my mind means that Putin, while the president may be willing to negotiate and may be willing to sit at the table, Vladimir Putin is not, because it's in his interest. He believes it's in Russia's interest to carry this war out as long as possible because he thinks that Russia benefits from that. Well, until we change the dynamic, that's what he's going to continue to do.
Well, again, that may very well be what he believes. At some point, time will, and his actions will tell. But I think the president wants to exhaust every opportunity to bring about a peaceful negotiation here, an end to this conflict as soon as possible. And I think we should be happy that we have a president that wants to end a war, and that he's, it's taxing on the patience, and it's taken a long time. But 4 months has been dedicated to this. But ultimately, I think it's a good thing that we have a president that's trying to end this war. He wants to give it every available chance possible. And doesn't want to foreclose anything too early. If there's still a chance to achieve peace, he wants to make that happen.
I'm not disagreeing with that. I agree. I think we should try and end this war. I'm just questioning his tactics and whether he's really being successful in the way he's doing this. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter for the record a fact sheet that it's called the PRC supporting international assistance as U.S. withdraws. It's dated April 29th, 2025, and what it lays out is specific examples of where the PRC has come in and taken over U.S. assistance programs as we've withdrawn.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Britt's on her way. If you can just hang in there a few more minutes. It's been a long day. You've done a terrific job, in my view. Let me just, what you said the last 5 or 6 minutes has been really, I think, put a fine point on what we're trying to do here. Count me in for ending the war peacefully, honorably, and justly. And I think President Trump, above all others, has the ability to do that because, quite frankly, I think he's the one guy that Putin probably does not want to cross. Senator Shaheen's point, I share her concerns in this regard. President Trump called for a ceasefire. Ukraine said yes. Putin's making excuses. He said, go to Istanbul. Zelensky went. Putin didn't. Having said all that, you've described a process that's very clear to me. In the coming days, not weeks, Russia will give us a term sheet of what they need to get to a ceasefire, and we'll have some indication of how serious they are. I think that's a good thing, Marco, that we're now getting them to put up their terms for a ceasefire. And after they do that, I'll be glad to talk to you and get your view of what this means, and I'll share my view. The fact that you invited me to Turkey, I think the committee should be, that was really, I appreciated that. You took a member of the Senate, and I was at every meeting, and Secretary Rubio wanted people to hear the way our system works. And you, quite frankly, my friend, have really gone the extra mile of trying to bring this coalition together, give Russia the space it needs to get to yes. I'm not out to humiliate Putin. I'm no fan of his. I understand that we want to get this war over. But in the next few days, we'll have some indication of how serious he is. And I promise you, we're over 80 now. If the next few days is like the last months, then you can just count on us moving, because I think it's our job to try to help the world in this war. The Chinese are watching. This is a dress rehearsal for Taiwan. How this ends, I think, will determine greatly what happens to the future of Taiwan. And I want this war to end in a way that Xi thinks, well, that didn't work out too well for Putin. Again, I'm not out to humiliate Russia, but I am out to make sure the war ends in a way not to start new wars. Afghanistan was a disaster. If we do not get this right in Ukraine and the world perceives that Putin got away with it, that will be even worse. That will be worse than Afghanistan. So I have every confidence we're not going to let that happen. I have every confidence in Secretary Rubio. I have seen him in action, and I tell you, the way he interacted with his colleagues in NATO was just masterful, and I appreciate being part of that trip. And what you're doing in Syria, we don't talk enough about it, could be a game changer, because you're right. If we don't do something, in a matter of weeks or months, the place will become ungoverned, and we'll have another Al-Qaeda, ISIS recruiting camp in the Mideast. So count me in for wanting to help you on sanctions. Do we know where Senator Britt's at? All right. She had her chance. She's great. She's working hard. You've been here all day. Thank you so much. The hearing's adjourned.
We just need to, I'll send an email out on the questions.